My name is Margaret, I'm 58 years old, and I live in Dallas, Texas. Today I want to share with you one of the most embarrassing, yet liberating moments of my life. A moment that completely changed how I see myself as a plus-size woman and how I deal with betrayal and disrespect. This story might shock you, but I guarantee it will inspire you to never let anyone walk all over you again. It was a hot Tuesday evening in July 2019. I had just returned from another frustrating shopping trip where, once again, I couldn't find clothes in my size. At 280 pounds and 5 feet 4 inches, finding fashionable clothes was always a challenge. But that day, the humiliation was different. The saleswoman at the boutique looked at me from head to toe and said, "Ma'am, I think you're in the wrong store. We don't carry sizes for people like you." The way she said it, with that look of disgust, made my heart sink. I felt like I was invisible, worthless, just because of my body size. I arrived home feeling defeated, my self-esteem shattered. But what I discovered that night would change everything. As I was putting away the laundry, I found something that made my blood run cold. A receipt for a romantic dinner at an expensive restaurant. The date? Last Tuesday, when my husband Robert said he was working late. But that wasn't the worst part. When I looked more carefully at our joint credit card statement, I found charges at Victoria's Secret, a jewelry store, and even a hotel. All on dates when he claimed to be traveling for work. My heart pounded as I realized the painful truth. Robert, my husband of 23 years, was cheating on me. And apparently, he was spending our money on another woman while I struggled with my self-esteem, believing I wasn't good enough because of my weight. That night, I cried until I had no tears left. But then, something inside me ignited. A fury I had never felt before. If he wanted to play games, I would show him what this fat, worthless wife was capable of. If this story of a courageous plus-size woman has already moved you, hit that like button now so more people can watch this video. Before I tell you what I did next, let me explain who I was before this moment of revelation. I had been married to Robert since I was 35. We met at a company party where he worked as a financial manager, and I was an administrative assistant. At that time, I weighed about 180 pounds and, although I was never thin, I felt confident and beautiful. Over the years, especially after we tried unsuccessfully to have children, I began to gain weight. Each failed fertility treatment, each negative pregnancy test, each doctor telling us it was unlikely we would conceive, drove me deeper into emotional eating. Food became my comfort, my refuge from the pain of unfulfilled motherhood. Robert, who was initially understanding, gradually became more distant. He started making subtle comments about my weight. "Maybe you should try that new diet," or "I saw a gym commercial that might interest you." These comments, though disguised as concern, slowly eroded my self-confidence. I threw myself into taking care of our home, trying to be the perfect wife. I cooked elaborate meals, kept the house spotless, took care of all the household administration. I thought that if I couldn't be the thin, fertile wife he wanted, at least I could be useful in other ways. How naive I was. Over the years, I became increasingly isolated. My few friends from work had distanced themselves, and I had stopped going to social events because I felt embarrassed about my size. Robert never defended me when people made comments about my weight, and I started to believe I really was unworthy of love and respect. By 2019, I had become a shadow of who I used to be. I spent my days at home, managing Robert's business finances remotely, while he traveled constantly for work. Or so I thought. I lived in a constant state of feeling grateful that he put up with me despite my size, never imagining he was living a double life. The discovery of Robert's betrayal hit me like a truck. But it wasn't just the pain of infidelity that devastated me. It was the realization of how much I had diminished myself for someone who didn't deserve it. I spent that entire night awake, going through years of memories, understanding signs I had ignored. I remembered the times he came home late smelling of perfume different from mine. The mysterious phone calls he took in another room. The business trips that seemed to multiply. The way he stopped touching me, stopped looking at me with desire, stopped making me feel like a woman. I had attributed all of this to my weight gain, believing I was the problem. The emotional pain was unbearable. I felt stupid, humiliated, and betrayed. But what hurt most was realizing I had spent years hating my own body, believing I wasn't worthy of love, while he was out there living it up with someone else. I had internalized every cruel comment, every disdainful look, every rejection, thinking it was all my fault for being fat. I looked at myself in the bedroom mirror that night and saw a broken woman. But as the hours passed, something began to change inside me. The sadness was transforming into rage. Pure, burning rage. Not just at Robert, but at myself for accepting so little, for believing I deserved so little just because of my size. I started thinking about all the times I had apologized for taking up space, literally and figuratively. All the times I had made myself smaller, quieter, less visible, so others would feel more comfortable around my large body. All the dreams I had abandoned, the opportunities one had rejected, the life I had stopped living because I believed fat women like me didn't deserve happiness. That night I made a decision. I wouldn't confront Robert conventionally. I wouldn't cry, beg, or try to compete with the other woman. I would show him exactly what this fat, worthless wife he thought he could fool was capable of. And my plan was both brilliant and absolutely crazy. As I planned my revenge, memories of other humiliating situations flooded back. Each one now seemed connected to this moment of awakening. I remembered the time we went to Robert's company party, and his boss's wife looked me up and down and asked, "And you are?" As if she couldn't believe Robert was married to someone like me. Robert just stood there, saying nothing, while I felt the ground open up beneath my feet. There was also that horrible day at the mall when we were looking for clothes for a wedding. The saleswoman in the elegant store took one look at me and said they didn't have anything in my size, suggesting I try the special stores for plus-size women. Robert was embarrassed and said we should leave. Instead of defending me, he seemed ashamed to be seen with me. I remembered family dinners where Robert's thin, athletic sister would make comments about portion sizes and healthy eating, always looking directly at me. And Robert would laugh along, as if my eating habits were a shared joke between them. I started declining these invitations, making excuses, until I stopped being invited altogether. There were the times at restaurants when Robert would order first, and then look at me expectantly when I chose something more substantial, as if he were monitoring my food choices. I began ordering salads even when I wanted something else, just to avoid his disapproving look. The most painful memories were of intimate moments that became increasingly rare. Robert would turn off the lights, avoid looking at my body, and treat sex like a chore to be completed quickly. I convinced myself this was normal, that I should be grateful he still wanted to be with me despite my size. I thought about all the vacations we didn't take, because Robert said he was embarrassed to be seen with me in a bathing suit. All the social events we skipped because he claimed I wouldn't fit in. All the dreams I gave up because I believed fat women like me didn't deserve to dream big. Each of these memories now felt like a piece of a puzzle I was finally seeing clearly. Robert hadn't just cheated on me. He had been systematically destroying my self-esteem for years, making me believe I was lucky to have him while he searched for someone who met his shallow beauty standards. That morning, after a sleepless night filled with painful memories and growing rage, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of coffee and made the most important decision of my life. I was done being a victim, done apologizing for existing, done believing that my worth as a woman was determined by the number on a scale. I looked at that credit card statement again and calculated exactly how much Robert had spent on his affair. Nearly $15,000 in 6 months. Expensive dinners, gifts, hotels, trips. All while I clipped coupons and bought generic products to save money, while I wore old faded clothes because it wasn't worth spending money on clothes for someone my size. But what really opened my eyes was finding a text message Robert had forgotten to delete. It was to his lover, and it said, "Don't worry about Margaret. She's so insecure about her weight that she doesn't suspect anything. She thinks she's lucky I'm still with her." Reading those words was like receiving a punch to the stomach, but it was also liberating. I finally saw Robert for who he really was. A shallow, cruel man who had been manipulating my insecurities to hide his own despicable behavior. I realized that for years, I had been living Robert's narrative about my life. He had convinced me I was undesirable, worthless, lucky to have him. But sitting there that morning, I began to question everything. Why did I believe a man who cheated and lied was qualified to determine my worth? Why had I given him the power to make me feel ashamed of my own body? I started thinking about who I was before Robert, before the weight gain, before the years of emotional manipulation. I remembered a confident woman who had dreams, ambitions, who laughed freely and took up space in the world without apologizing. That woman was still inside me, buried under years of shame and low self-esteem, but she was there. That's when I decided I wouldn't just expose Robert's betrayal. I would do it in a way that would be absolutely unforgettable, and would teach him never to underestimate a plus-size woman again. My plan was risky, potentially illegal, and completely crazy. But after years of being the good, submissive wife, I was ready to be the vengeful, unpredictable woman Robert never imagined I could be. The plan that formed in my mind was both simple and diabolical. I knew Robert's routine perfectly. Every Thursday night, he claimed to have late meetings with clients, but now I knew he was actually with his lover. He would come home around 11 p.m., take a shower, and then, well, he would want to be intimate with me. It was his pattern. Spend the evening with her, and then come home to relieve his guilt by being with his wife. I had noticed that lately Robert had been using a personal lubricant during our intimate moments. He kept it in his nightstand drawer and always applied it himself, never letting me handle it. Now I understood why. He was probably using the same product with both women and didn't want me to notice any differences. My plan was brilliant in its simplicity. I would replace his lubricant with super glue. Not enough to cause serious harm, but enough to create an extremely embarrassing and uncomfortable situation. I wanted him to experience a fraction of the humiliation I had endured for years. I spent that Wednesday researching. I found a super glue that had almost the same consistency and color as his lubricant. I bought it at a hardware store on the other side of town, paying with cash so there would be no record. I felt like a spy on a secret mission, and for the first time in years, I felt alive, powerful. That Thursday morning, I carefully emptied Robert's lubricant tube and filled it with the super glue, making sure the consistency and appearance were identical. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from excitement. After years of being the victim, I was finally taking control of the situation. I spent the entire day nervous but determined. I cleaned the house, prepared dinner, and acted completely normal when Robert called to say he would be late at the office. I told him I understood and that I would be waiting for him. And I would be, with my trap perfectly set. And you, plus-size woman watching this? Have you ever been through something similar? Share in the comments and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more empowerment stories. As I waited for Robert to return that Thursday night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: control. For the first time since I discovered his betrayal, I wasn't the victim of the situation. I was the architect of what was about to happen. This feeling of power was intoxicating and terrifying at the same time. I realized that planning this revenge had awakened something inside me that had been dormant for years. I felt smart, creative, capable. All qualities I had forgotten I possessed while living in Robert's shadow, believing I was just a burden he was kind enough to carry. While I waited, I started thinking about other areas of my life where I had accepted less than I deserved. My job, for instance. I had been doing Robert's business financial management for years, basically running his consulting firm from behind the scenes, but I had never asked for official recognition or appropriate compensation. I just did it because he asked, grateful to feel useful. I thought about my dreams of starting my own business. Before marrying Robert, I had dreamed of opening a consulting firm for small businesses. I had the knowledge, the skills, the vision. But over the years, Robert had convinced me that a woman my size wouldn't be taken seriously in the business world, that clients would judge my appearance before listening to my ideas. That night, as I prepared to teach Robert a lesson he would never forget, I began to see all the ways I had made myself smaller. Not just physically, but emotionally, professionally, socially. I had spent so many years hiding, apologizing for existing, that I had forgotten what it felt like to be bold, audacious, unapologetic. The revenge I was planning wasn't just about punishing Robert for his infidelity. It was about reclaiming my power, my voice, my right to take up space in the world. It was about showing him, and myself, that this fat, worthless woman he thought he could manipulate was actually a force to be reckoned with. When I heard Robert's car in the driveway at 11:15 p.m., my heart was racing, but not with fear. It was racing with anticipation. I was about to become the protagonist of my own story again, instead of just a supporting character in his. Robert came home that night exactly as I predicted. He greeted me with a guilty kiss on the cheek and said the meeting had been productive, but exhausting. I smiled sweetly and told him I had missed him, playing my role perfectly. He went to shower, and I lay in bed, every nerve in my body alert. When he came out of the bathroom, I was waiting in our darkened bedroom. Robert approached with that familiar routine, and I let everything proceed naturally. I watched him reach for his nightstand drawer, take out the tube, and apply what he thought was lubricant. In the darkness, he noticed nothing different about the consistency or smell. What happened next was beyond my wildest expectations. Within minutes, Robert began to feel something was wrong. He tried to pull away but couldn't. The super glue had done its job perfectly. Robert's panic was immediate and absolute. He started shouting, asking what was happening, trying desperately to separate himself from the situation. I turned on the light and looked at his face, the confusion, the fear, the beginning realization that something was very, very wrong. For the first time in years, Robert was completely vulnerable, completely at my mercy. And I felt powerful. Incredibly, intoxicatingly powerful. "What did you do?" he screamed, and I could see in his eyes the exact moment he understood this wasn't an accident. I got up calmly, put on my robe, and looked at him directly. "I found out about your little adventures, Robert. About the restaurants, the hotels, the jewelry. About how you've been spending our money on another woman while making me feel worthless for being fat." His face went through a spectrum of emotions: shock, fear, anger, and finally, something I had never seen before: respect. For the first time in years, Robert was looking at me not as the pathetic, grateful wife, but as a woman capable of calculated revenge. "You're crazy," he shouted, but I could hear something else in his voice. He was scared. Scared of me. And I liked it. What I hadn't anticipated was how quickly the situation would escalate. Robert's panic increased as he realized he couldn't resolve the problem on his own. The super glue was working exactly as I had planned, but Robert's desperation was greater than I expected. He started talking about calling a doctor, going to the emergency room. "You can't be serious," I said calmly. "Do you want to explain to emergency room doctors how you ended up in this situation? Do you want this story to spread through your professional network?" Robert looked at me with a mixture of fury and terror. He was beginning to understand that I had him exactly where I wanted him. But Robert, in his desperation, decided to try to solve the problem himself. He went to the bathroom and started trying different solutions: soap, hot water, oil. Nothing worked. The super glue was designed to be permanent, and Robert was learning this the hard way. After an hour of failed attempts, Robert was in obvious pain and beginning to panic seriously. I was starting to worry that maybe I had gone too far. My plan was to humiliate him, not to cause real harm. The power I felt was intoxicating, but I wasn't a cruel person, despite everything he had done to me. "Robert," I said, "you need to calm down. We need to think clearly about how to solve this." But he was beyond reason. The pain, the humiliation, the fear were consuming him. He started talking about calling 911, and I realized my perfect revenge plan was about to become a public scandal that would involve both of us. That's when I realized that true power isn't about revenge or humiliation. True power is about making decisions that improve your life, not just make others' lives worse. I was learning this lesson in real time, in the most bizarre situation imaginable. I grabbed my phone and started researching emergency solutions. I found information about solvents that could dissolve super glue, but we didn't have them at home. Robert would have to go to the hospital, and our private revenge drama was about to become a public humiliation for both of us. As I watched Robert in his desperate state, something unexpected happened. Instead of feeling satisfied with his humiliation, I began to feel powerful in a different way. Not the petty, vindictive power of revenge, but the deep, authentic power that comes from finally standing up for yourself. I realized that for years I had allowed Robert to define my worth. His opinion of my body, his approval or disapproval, his presence or absence, all of this had determined how I felt about myself. But in that moment, seeing him vulnerable and dependent on me, I understood that I had always had power. I had just chosen not to use it. While Robert panicked in the bathroom, I sat on our bed and had a moment of absolute clarity. I looked around our bedroom, our expensive furniture, our king-size bed, our walk-in closet full of Robert's designer clothes and my few faded outfits. I saw all the ways I had made myself invisible in my own home. I got up and walked to my side of the closet. Hidden in the back were clothes I hadn't worn in years, colorful dresses, elegant blouses, clothes from before I convinced myself that fat women should wear only black and hide in the shadows. I pulled out a red dress I had loved and asked myself, when was the last time I wore something just because I liked it, not because it was appropriate for someone my size? I looked at myself in the full-length mirror, not with the self-hatred I had cultivated for years, but with curiosity. I saw a 58-year-old woman who had survived years of emotional manipulation. I saw someone who had managed a business, maintained a home, supported a husband who didn't deserve it. I saw strength I had forgotten I possessed. Robert's cries from the bathroom brought me back to reality, but something had changed inside me. I was no longer the desperate wife trying to punish her cheating husband. I was a woman who had just discovered she was much stronger and more capable than she had ever imagined. I called out to Robert, "I'm going to help you, but first you're going to listen to everything I have to say." And for the first time in our marriage, my voice had an authority that demanded respect. "Robert," I called through the bathroom door, "we need to call for professional help. But before we do, you're going to hear everything I have to say." I could hear him hyperventilating on the other side of the door, but I continued with a calm I didn't know I possessed. "For years, you made me believe I was worthless because of my weight. You made me feel grateful that you tolerated me while you were out there betraying our marriage. You spent our money on another woman while I clipped coupons and felt guilty for buying anything for myself." I sat on our bed, feeling strangely serene despite the chaos happening in our bathroom. "I found the receipts, Robert. I know about the dinners, the hotels, the jewelry. I know you've been living a double life while making me believe I was the problem." His voice came out cracked from the bathroom. "Margaret, please, we can talk about this later. I need help now." But I wasn't finished. For years, he had controlled the timing and content of our conversations. Now it was my turn. "The woman you're cheating with," I continued. "I'm sure she's thin, young, everything you think I'm not. But let me tell you something, Robert. While you were playing games, I was managing your business, keeping your finances in order, making sure your life ran smoothly. You want to know who the worthless one is in this marriage?" I heard him trying the door handle, but I had locked it from our side. "Margaret, this is serious. I could have permanent damage." His desperation was palpable, but I felt surprisingly calm. "Yes, Robert, it is serious. As serious as the damage you've done to my self-esteem over the years. As serious as the lies you've been telling. As serious as the disrespect you've shown our marriage." I paused, listening to his panicked breathing. "But unlike you, I'm not a cruel person. I'm going to call for help." I picked up my phone, but not to call 911 immediately. First, I called my sister Linda, whom I hadn't spoken to in months because Robert always found excuses to avoid my family. "Linda, it's me. I need you to come over now. It's complicated, but I need your support." Linda arrived 30 minutes later, and after I explained the situation, leaving out some of the more embarrassing details, we called 911. "We have a medical emergency," I told the dispatcher. "My husband is stuck and needs immediate assistance." I was amazed at how calm I sounded. The paramedics arrived quickly, followed by the fire department. What happened next was both mortifying and absolutely liberating. Robert had to be freed by professionals in our bedroom, while I watched from the doorway with my arms crossed. The fire captain, a woman around my age, asked what had happened. Robert, completely humiliated, couldn't even speak. So I answered, "My husband had an accident with some adhesive. These things happen when people are careless." The paramedic looked at me suspiciously, but didn't ask more questions. While the professionals worked to free Robert, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: satisfaction. Not just with the revenge, but with the fact that I had finally stood up for myself. I had finally shown Robert that the fat, worthless wife he thought he could deceive was actually a woman with strength, intelligence, and the courage to fight back. Linda held my hand the entire time, whispering, "I'm so proud of you." She had seen how Robert treated me over the years, how I had gradually become a shadow of who I used to be. Having her support in that moment meant everything to me. When the paramedics finally freed Robert, he had to be taken to the hospital for additional medical treatment. As they put him on the stretcher, he looked at me with a mixture of hatred and something that looked like respect? Fear? I wasn't sure, but I liked it. "Margaret," he said as they carried him out, "we need to talk." I looked at him directly and replied, "Yes, Robert, we do. But this time it will be on my terms." The fire captain looked at me and, I could swear, smiled slightly before leaving. After everyone left, Linda and I sat in my kitchen drinking coffee. "So," she said, "what happens now?" I looked at her and, for the first time in years, I smiled genuinely. "Now, I rebuild my life." If you believe that obese women can achieve anything, subscribe to the channel and share this video with a friend who needs to be empowered. The story of that night spread quickly, though not in the way I expected. The fire captain, whose name was Susan, called me 2 days later. "I don't know exactly what happened at your house," she said, "but I wanted to tell you that I admired your composure during a clearly difficult situation." Susan invited me for coffee, and that's when I learned something that changed my perspective completely. She told me she had been in an abusive marriage for 15 years and had finally found the courage to leave just 2 years earlier. "There was something in your eyes that night," she said. I recognized it because I've felt it myself. The moment when you realize you're stronger than you thought. Our conversation lasted 4 hours. I told her about Robert's betrayal, about years of emotional manipulation, about how I had lost myself trying to be the wife he wanted. Susan shared her own story of overcoming domestic violence and rebuilding her life at 52 years old. You know what the hardest part was? Susan asked. Learning to trust my own judgment again. Learning to believe I deserved better. Her words resonated deeply with me because that's exactly what I was going through. Susan introduced me to a support group for women who had survived emotional abuse. It was the first time I had heard the term emotional abuse applied to my marriage, and it was revelatory. I learned that Robert's behavior, the constant criticism, making me feel grateful for his presence, isolating me from friends and family, controlling my self-image, were all classic tactics of emotional manipulation. In the support group, I met women of all sizes, ages, and backgrounds who had similar stories. But what impressed me most was meeting other plus-size women who had overcome not just abusive relationships, but also society's prejudice against fat women. There was Carmen, a 62-year-old woman who weighed 320 pounds and had left her husband after 30 years of marriage to open her own bakery. There was Diana, 55 years old, who had started a blog about plus-size fashion and body positivity after her divorce. These women were living proof that it was possible to rebuild life at any age and any size. For the first time in years, I felt part of a community. I felt understood, supported, valued for who I was, not despite my size, but including my size as part of my complete identity. While Robert was recovering from his accident and staying at his brother's house, I had changed the locks. I began to explore opportunities one had put aside for years. The support group had awakened something in me, the desire to help other women going through similar situations. I started researching courses in financial counseling and discovered I could get certified to help women who were going through divorces understand their finances and plan their financial independence. It was perfect. I could use all the experience I had gained managing Robert's business, but now to help women instead of enabling a cheating husband. I also started taking care of my appearance again, not to please anyone, but because I deserved to feel beautiful. I went to a salon for the first time in 3 years and asked for a modern haircut. The stylist, a young woman named Ashley, was enthusiastic and encouraging. "You have beautiful bone structure," she said. "Let's create a look that makes you feel powerful." The transformation was incredible. The new haircut, combined with confidence I was gradually recovering, made me look years younger. When I looked in the mirror, I saw the woman I used to be, but stronger, wiser, more determined. I also started shopping for new clothes. Instead of hiding in black, shapeless outfits, I chose colors that made me feel alive. I bought a royal blue dress that hugged my curves, a red blouse that made me feel elegant, comfortable jeans that actually fit well. Each new piece of clothing was an act of self-love, an affirmation that I deserved to feel beautiful. But the biggest change was in how I carried myself. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. I stopped making myself smaller in crowded places. I started walking with my head up, my shoulders back, taking up the space that was rightfully mine. Linda noticed the change immediately. "It's like you're awakening from a long sleep," she said during one of our weekly dinners. And she was right. I was waking up from years of believing I was less worthy of love, respect, and happiness because of my body size. The divorce process was more complicated than I anticipated. Robert tried to manipulate the situation, claiming I had assaulted him and deserved nothing from our assets. But I had prepared well. I had copies of all the evidence of his affair, detailed records of his financial infidelity, and testimonies from people who had witnessed his emotional abuse over the years. My lawyer, a tough woman named Patricia Stevens, was impressed with my organization and preparation. "Most women come to me emotionally destroyed and without documentation," she said. "You came prepared for war." And I was. Years of managing Robert's finances had taught me the importance of keeping detailed records. The most difficult part wasn't the legal battle, but dealing with people's reactions to my story. Some friends and family members thought I had gone too far with the superglue incident. They seemed more concerned with Robert's embarrassment than with years of betrayal and emotional abuse I had suffered. But I also received unexpected support. Robert's own sister called me to say she had always known he was unfaithful and admired my courage in finally standing up to him. Several women from our neighborhood reached out to share their own stories of marital dissatisfaction and emotional abuse. The most challenging moment came when Robert tried to use my weight against me in court, claiming I was mentally unstable due to issues with my body image. It was his last attempt to control the narrative, to make my size the problem instead of his behavior. But Patricia was ready. She presented evidence of Robert's systematic emotional manipulation, his financial betrayals, his pattern of making me feel worthless. She painted a picture of a man who had psychologically abused his wife for years and was now trying to blame her for fighting back. When the judge ruled in my favor, granting me half of our assets and monthly alimony, I felt a sense of justice I had never experienced before. But more important than the money was the official recognition that I had been wronged, that my pain was valid, that I deserved reparation. Do you see how a determined overweight woman can change not only her life, but other people's lives too? Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for more stories like this. With my divorce finalized and my finances secure, I decided to take the biggest risk of my life. I used my settlement money to open my own financial consulting firm, specializing in helping women gain financial independence. I called it Freedom Financial, and decided to focus specifically on women going through divorces, widowhood, or major life transitions. My first client was Carmen from the support group. She needed help organizing her bakery's finances and planning for expansion. Working with her was completely different from managing Robert's business. Carmen valued my expertise, listened to my recommendations, and treated me as a true professional partner. Word spread quickly among women in the support group and their networks. Within 6 months, I had 15 regular clients. Within a year, I had to hire an assistant. Women were seeking me out not just for my financial expertise, but because they felt comfortable with someone who understood the challenges of rebuilding life after emotional trauma. I also decided to share my story more broadly. I started a blog called Plus Size Full Power, where I wrote about financial independence, self-esteem, and empowerment for plus-size women. My first post, titled, "How I Used Super Glue to Stick It to My Cheating Husband and Found My Power," went viral. The response was incredible. I received messages from women around the world, sharing their own stories of overcoming betrayal and self-doubt. Many were plus-size women who had been made to feel invisible or worthless because of their size. My story gave them hope that they too could find their power and rebuild their lives. A local television station contacted me for an interview about entrepreneurship after divorce. When I appeared on screen, confident in my red dress and new haircut, I thought about the woman I had been just 2 years earlier, hiding in shapeless clothes, believing she was worthless. During the interview, the host asked how I had found the courage to start over at 58. I realized that I had been living someone else's narrative about my life, I replied. When I finally decided to write my own story, I discovered I was much braver and more capable than I had ever imagined. 2 years after that memorable night with the super glue, my life had been completely transformed. Freedom Financial had grown into a successful firm with over 50 clients. I had been invited to speak at conferences about women's financial empowerment and had become a recognized expert in financial planning for life transitions. But my greatest achievement wasn't professional. It was personal. I had learned to love and respect myself in a way I never thought possible. At 280 pounds, I felt more beautiful, confident, and powerful than I ever had at 180 pounds during my marriage. I had discovered that true beauty comes from self-respect, not from a number on a scale. My blog had evolved into a platform that reached thousands of women. I received daily messages from plus-size women who said my story had inspired them to leave abusive relationships, start their own businesses, or simply begin treating themselves with the respect they deserved. One particularly memorable message came from a 45-year-old woman named Sarah in California. She wrote, "Your story saved my marriage, not because I used super glue on my husband, but because it taught me to value myself enough to demand respect. When I started treating myself with dignity, my husband had no choice but to do the same. I had also reconnected with old dreams I thought were lost forever. I enrolled in a business administration master's program, something I had always wanted to do but Robert had discouraged, saying it was a waste of money for someone who would never be taken seriously in the corporate world. At 60 years old, I was the oldest student in my class and certainly the largest. But instead of feeling out of place, I felt inspired. My life experience, my business success, and my hard-won confidence made me a natural leader in group projects and class discussions. My professors were impressed with my practical knowledge and unique perspective. One of them, Dr. Martinez, invited me to co-author an article about financial recovery after domestic abuse. The article was published in a prestigious business journal and led to speaking invitations at universities across the country. I had also started dating again, something I never thought would be possible. Through a friend from the support group, I met David, a 62-year-old widower who owned a bookstore. Our first date was coffee, and I was terrified he would judge my appearance. But David looked at me with genuine interest and respect from the moment we met. "You have such intelligent eyes," he said during our first conversation. "And when you talk about your business, you light up in the most beautiful way." For the first time in decades, I felt seen and valued for who I truly was, not despite my size, but including everything that made me who I am. The recognition of my work began to extend far beyond Dallas. I was invited to speak at the National Conference on Women's Financial Independence in New York, sharing the stage with renowned economists and financial experts. When I walked onto that stage, wearing a stunning purple dress that hugged my curves with pride, I received a standing ovation before even saying a word. My presentation, titled From Victim to Victor: How Financial Knowledge Becomes Personal Power, was one of the most attended sessions of the conference. I shared my story, the betrayal, the revenge, the awakening, and the transformation, with an audience of over 800 people. The response was overwhelming. After my talk, I was surrounded by women wanting to share their own stories, ask for advice, or simply thank me for giving them hope. A 35-year-old woman named Jennifer told me, "I've been married for 12 years to a man who makes me feel invisible because I'm fat. Your story showed me I don't have to accept that. A publishing house approached me about writing a book. Your story represents something powerful," the editor told me. "You're showing plus-size women that they can be protagonists of their own lives, not just supporting characters in someone else's story." The book, titled Glued Together: How I Found My Power in the Stickiest Situation, became a bestseller within 6 months. It wasn't just bought by plus-size women, but by any woman who had ever felt diminished or undervalued. The book tour took me to 30 cities, and at each event, I met women who said my story had changed their lives. But the impact went beyond individual women. My story began to be used in domestic violence prevention programs and self-esteem workshops. Therapists were recommending my book to clients struggling with emotional abuse recovery. Universities were including my case study in courses about financial empowerment and domestic violence. The most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. The fire captain, Susan, who had helped rescue Robert that memorable night, nominated me for a community service award. In her nomination letter, she wrote, "Margaret showed me that sometimes the most powerful act of self-defense is refusing to remain a victim. Her transformation has inspired countless women to find their own strength." Receiving that award at a ceremony attended by Dallas's mayor and city council was surreal. 2.5 years earlier, I had been a broken woman hiding in shapeless clothes, believing she was lucky to have a cheating husband. Now I was being recognized as a community leader and inspiration. During my acceptance speech, I looked out at the audience and saw faces of women I had helped, friends who had supported me, and even some people who had doubted my ability to rebuild my life. "This award doesn't belong just to me," I said. "It belongs to every woman who has ever been told she wasn't enough and decided to prove that narrative wrong." Today, at 61 years old and still 280 pounds, I am the most confident and fulfilled woman I have ever been. My business, Freedom Financial, now has offices in 3 cities and a team of 12 financial advisors. We specialize in helping women achieve financial independence, and our success rate is over 90%. But more important than professional success is the personal transformation I've undergone. I wake up every morning grateful for my body, not because it's perfect by society's standards, but because it's strong, healthy, and completely mine. I dress in colors that make me happy, I take up space without apologizing, and I speak my mind with confidence. My relationship with David has blossomed into something beautiful and healthy. He loves my curves, admires my strength, and supports my dreams. When we go out together, I no longer worry about what people think when they see a fat woman with an attractive man. I know I deserve love and respect, and anyone who doesn't see that isn't worth my concern. I've also become a mentor for other plus-size women starting over in life. Through my blog, my book, and my speaking engagements, I reach thousands of women monthly. I receive letters from women who have left abusive marriages, started their own businesses, or simply learned to love themselves because of my story. One of the most rewarding aspects of my transformation has been reconnecting with my own family. Linda and I are closer than ever, and she often says she's proud to have her real sister back. I've also rebuilt relationships with cousins and old friends who had distanced themselves during my marriage to Robert, not because they didn't love me, but because they couldn't bear to watch me diminish myself. As for Robert, our paths crossed recently at a business event. He looked older, less confident than I remembered. When he saw me, radiant in a red dress, surrounded by colleagues and friends, I could see the shock in his eyes. The woman he had convinced was worthless had become everything he never believed she could be. He approached me during a break and said, "Margaret, you look incredible." I never imagined. I looked at him calmly and replied, "That's the problem, Robert. You never imagined I could be anything more than what you needed me to be. But I always had this potential. I just needed to stop asking for your permission to use it." That brief conversation was closure I didn't know I needed. I felt no anger, no desire for revenge, no need to prove anything to him. I had moved so far beyond who I was during our marriage that Robert had become just a character in my origin story, important for understanding where I came from, but irrelevant to where I was going. If you also believe in the transformative power of plus-size women, hit that like button and comment on how this story inspired you. As I finish sharing this story with you, I want you to understand something fundamental. That night with the super glue wasn't really about revenge. It was about the moment I decided I would no longer accept being treated as less than I deserved. It was about reclaiming my power, my voice, my right to take up space in this world. To every plus-size woman watching this video, I want you to know that your worth is not determined by a number on a scale. Your value is not measured by how well you fit into society's narrow beauty standards. You are worthy of love, respect, success, and happiness exactly as you are right now. I spent years believing that I needed to make myself smaller physically and emotionally to be acceptable to others. I apologized for existing, for taking up space, for having needs and desires. I allowed one man's shallow perspective to define my entire sense of self-worth. Don't make my mistake. You don't need anyone's permission to be confident. You don't need to lose weight to deserve respect. You don't need to hide your light to make others comfortable. You are enough right now exactly as you are. If you're in a relationship where someone makes you feel ashamed of your body, where you're made to feel grateful for scraps of affection, where your size is used as a weapon against your self-esteem, know that you deserve better. Much better. The transformation I underwent wasn't about changing my body. It was about changing my mind. When I stopped believing I was worthless, others stopped treating me as if I were. When I started demanding respect, I began receiving it. When I decided I deserved love and success, both became possible. Your journey might not involve super glue and fire departments, and I hope it doesn't, but it can involve the same fundamental decision. The decision to stop accepting less than you deserve and to start creating the life you truly want. Remember, every extraordinary woman was once an ordinary woman who decided she wouldn't accept ordinary treatment. You have that same power within you. Use it. If this empowerment story touched your soul, subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, share it with someone special, and write in the comments which city and country you're watching from.